So we are live. Hi, everybody. How's everybody doing this evening? Welcome to Women of Deconversion. That's right. Who hasn't, right? Welcome to Women of Deconversion. This evening, we are in our sort of Halloween costumes. We have a scarecrow. I'm a cat.
Yeah.
I'm not. Okay.
Yes,
Kate's Kate.
I'm a dangerous serial killer. We look like everybody else.
Oh,
sorry, I totally stole that line from Buffy, but anyway.
Still counts. It was still.
Yeah.
You're a YouTuber.
That's right. I'm dressed as a YouTuber. We look like everybody else. So this evening we're gonna.
I was gonna wear a proper costume, but it wasn't flattering. So.
That's the good thing about just from here up. Right? You don't have to worry about that. You can just I'm in yoga pants right now. It doesn't matter. Who cares? Who cares? Doesn't matter. We're going to talk about lust, right? I've been pumped for this one. I'm so excited.
I'm so sad that it's only like a few of us. So.
I know, because this was the one that we were all the most excited about. Well, to be fair, Jen just got married. So happy newlyweds to Jen.
She's just living the lust topic. It's okay.
That's right. She's doing our field research. She's our field correspondent today.
Yes. Oh, that's so good.
That's right. We're thinking of you and Matt. Poor Matt.
Yes, congratulations. Yay.
Yay. Congrats, guys. So I suppose we should introduce ourselves. So I'll start, I guess, since I'm talking. I am Shannon Q. I have a channel called Shannon Q because, as I've mentioned before, I'm incredibly uncreative and very pragmatic. So that's the name of the channel. And I talk about atheist advocacy and also the intersection of psychology and religion and deconversion and atheism, and also try to engage in respectful dialogue regarding complex issues. So why don't we go next to Kate? Why don't you introduce yourself before we get started?
Hello, I'm Kate. I have a channel called Bionic Dance, which is a reference to an 80s cartoon. If you know it, you're awesome. And I spend a lot of time debunking the living heck out of religious videos. People will say goofy stuff, and I'll show them why it's goofy. So yeah, go to Bionic Dance, subscribe, or else.
Yeah. Or else. I'm subscribed because I don't want to know what or else is. I don't want to find out. And Courtney.
We've heard all sorts of threats from Kate as we've gone on. We've got all kinds of threats. She was a unique one at the time. It's very clever. I'm Courtney. I am a co-creator for Atheist Edge. I'm also president of a local atheist group in Texas, Metroplex Atheists. And I'm very proud to be part of the Women of Deconversion, so I usually plug that as well. My degree is in psychology, so what I have to contribute is usually centered around that. And yeah, we do a lot of dialogue and discussions of interesting topics. And yeah, we're thinkers. Yay.
You get me to read books that make me ragey. That happens sometimes on the atheist side.
My audiobooks on while I'm driving can be a little dangerous because I'm really bad.
I do the same thing.
I've punched steering wheels before. Bad. Angry scarecrow.
Before we start that story, me and Paul Gia were driving from Calgary to Edmonton on Saturday, and we don't listen to music as much, so we were gonna listen to an audiobook in the car, and we're like, let's download the Jordan Peterson book, the 12 Rules book.
Oh,
because if I'm gonna be angry, I want to be angry with somebody, so we're gonna listen to that on the way.
What's the topic? 12 of what?
12 the 12 Rules for Life from Jordan Peterson. It's an antidote to chaos, and just spoiler alert, chaos is femininity. Femininity is chaos. I can't wait.
Although, if you ever met my ex.
That might be the case in that instance. Yeah.
I could tell some stories, believe me. But that is the perils of being a lesbian. You get two women in the same house at once. Yeah.
Yep.
Oh my gosh. I don't know. Two of anybody in the same house at once. I don't live with anybody except for my kid. And that's ideal to me, right? I'll be perfectly honest with you. I can't imagine somebody else living here right now. But I don't know. I'm looking forward to living with Paul. But right now it's just kind of cool to just, wake up. My space is my space.
Right.
For the first time in my life. Everybody should experience that for a little bit, I think, at least.
Right.
No other
people. I love that. I did that for a year. Loved it.
Oh, it's great. I love it. Mm-hmm. All right, let's talk about lust. No more messing around. Let's go. Let's do it. So
this is our continuation of our series of the 7 deadly sins. I'm not sure if we have any left after this one.
Okay.
I feel like we've done a lot. Oh, we have 3 left. Okay.
Is that how many 7 is?
I don't know how many we've done so far. I can't think about it. I mean, we did envy. Okay, anyway, I'm not going to list them. It's not what the video is. Anyway, so lust. Yay. That's the topic that we're doing for this month, and we've been very excited about this. I think maybe what we usually do is sort of go around the table and get initial ideas about just the topic of lust being a deadly sin, and perhaps our personal relationship with either that rule and that idea, or our personal relationship with like lust as a topic, whether it's like as dark and scary and dangerous and awful as religion makes it out to be sometimes.
I don't think so. I think conversely, it can be dangerous to stifle it, or stifle is probably not the best word, but suppress it. Like if you have those urges and those feelings, and the only reaction that you're receiving is you shouldn't be feeling that, don't do anything about it, don't even feel it, as a matter of fact, then that's really, really dangerous. And conversely, if you have urges to be in consensual relationships, like lesbian relationships, gay relationships, polyamorous relationships, and you're receiving the message that you can never, no matter how beautiful, consensual, like mutually consensual those relationships are, you can never do that because feeling that is completely not okay. That would be intensely damaging. And also, lust is a beautiful thing. Lust is a wonderful, beautiful thing, and I don't think that it should be stifled. I think it should be explored.
Well, I mean, I'm usually the atheist control group in this, because I was never religious in the first place, so I look at it all from outside. And when I look at like the way religion treats sexuality and lust and all of that, and all the shame they try to heap upon people for something that they can't help but feel, it's just it's creepy is what it is. It sounds like you're being put into some sort of psychological torture dungeon where you're not going to enjoy it at all, because it's like, here's this thing that you can't control. You want it, and it feels good, and it's horrible to feel good from it. And I look at that from the outside and I go, wow, that is some Marquis de Sade shit right there.
It's not even just about who you do it with. Like, a lot of the times it's about how you get to do it.
Right.
At all. Like that aspect of it.
Missionary position.
Right. I was taught that, oral in period, full stop. You just know. And you know what? Yes. Definitely, yes.
Well, yeah, and like the 50s and probably even later than that, you have this like claim that those things cause things like blindness and infertility, and there's this complete misinformation, and the only reason to do that. Hi, Christine.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I'm
here. Yay. But the only reason to do that, to make that sort of fear monger technique, is to prevent people from even having legitimate questions about how these things work, or to engage in those acts. And it's really, really tragic, because having a access to the full spectrum of life experience, including sexual experience, is something that I feel like is so important for people to not feel constricted about, because this is the one life we have, and this is the one, you know, time that we can experience these really high extreme levels of you know, bliss and passion and all these things. So it's really tragic when people try to constrict them at all in your life, because it's you know, if it doesn't harm anybody, then live your life.
Well, I mean, one thing I look at from the outside is all of those things in religion, like being a nun, for example, where you have to be celibate your entire life and all of that stuff. And a lot of the things that I look at where religion tries to limit you, confine you in those ways, it always seems like they're saying you have to be miserable for God's benefit in one way or another.
Yeah.
And sex is one of those things where, again, like I keep saying it, people cannot control those urges. You just can't. It's natural. And I have to wonder, like how many nuns are, you know, getting themselves off in the bathroom when no one's looking, and then having to beg forgiveness for it.
Probably all of them. Really?
Incestuous, the old man about doing that. It's creepy.
Yeah, I don't know. And like, what do you think about? I'm gonna have to play devil's advocate here. Let's get the religious perspective in here. When somebody says, "Well, when you give in to lust, that's bad for you. It's detrimental for you because you know nobody wants you to be a promiscuous person." That goes for men and women. That leads to relationships that are broken and damaged. And what do you think about that sort of perspective when they try to imbue that prerogative or that directive with that sort of?
I would say documentation needed. I think
citation, please.
I think that yeah, people having the freedom to live the type of life that feels right for them is completely fine, and assuming that certain behaviors are going to lead to problems in relationships, not only is that not necessarily the case, it also is their life to live, you know. And so if they want to deal with whatever consequences may come from them living their life a certain way and dealing with sex in a certain way, that's their life to live, and that's their mistake to make if they want to make it. And it may not be a mistake to them. It may be beautiful and wonderful, and that's totally fine, you know. People should be left to live their life as they see fit.
Christina, you trying to? I want Christina. Poor Christine just got here, and she's finally able to talk.
Yeah, I feel like it's funny because, like, since I was talking to you guys before the stream started, without like my vocal cords, I don't feel like I have them back yet. You know what I mean? It's like
she's still messaging us.
Phantom, like I'm like. Plus, my daughter is still up. And so
oh, no.
I'm dealing with that nonsense. So I want to, you know, bring this stuff up to her this soon. She's only 3. So now, yeah, so I do actually think, I mean, I think there are two sides of all of the deadly sins that we've talked about. You know, sort of there is this line that you have to think about, like lust when it doesn't, seek the other person's desire is bad, right? So when you are consumed by lust, there is sort of a different feeling there. And I think, you know, in the way that David killed Bathsheba's husband in order to do her, you know, because marry her, I guess. But just because he saw her bathing is a little bit overboard. So I think there is something to be said about what Shannon was devil advocating. And but I don't think it's at the extreme that, you know, we grew up with necessarily, or I grew up with.
But that more so demonstrates an inability to control or manage or mitigate your emotional reactions and how they manifest as behavior. And that could be true of anything, not just lust.
That's what I was saying. Yeah, the
covet
sins,
something.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that unfortunately the religious perspective can take something like that is a valid point about letting your lust run away with you to violate someone's bodily autonomy. That is something that is really awful, but the religious context can take lesser extremes and treat them as that level of extreme, and things that aren't bad at all, and treat those as levels of extreme. You know, equating homosexuality with pedophilia is something that's just really ridiculous and harmful and awful. But that is something that happens in a religious context a lot of the time. Not all, and not all religious. Not all pulpits make that argument. But there are many who do, and it can be really difficult, I think, for a religious person to sift through what of sexuality religion rejects is actually bad and what is okay, especially when you leave religion.
Do you think that they're essentially taking anything that could lead to somebody entering sort of an extreme altered emotional state and just saying, well, okay, well, don't do that at all. There's not a spectrum. We won't acknowledge a spectrum.
I wonder if it has something to do with like being like God. You know what I mean? Like having that kind of feeling. Like, I wonder if that's the origin, sort of, well, we're not God, so we can't feel that kind of joy without God or that pleasure. But then again, I mean, there are so many times when I've been in, church and people have been like, Jesus just consumed me and it felt like, and they just describe an orgasm. You know what I mean? You're like, oh,
it's a really shitty one.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you mention that. For those of you who don't know, just recently had brain surgery to get rid of my epilepsy. And the way I would often describe seizures is that they felt like, if you can imagine a really, really unpleasant orgasm, a lot of them would feel like that. Whoa. Seriously, it's like you get that all over body tingle, but it's like dripped in slime somehow. It's horrible.
Oh, that's awful.
That sounds terrible, yeah. But I can just imagine maybe that's what people who are slain in the spirit are. I cannot.
Who are what?
Who are slain in the spirit. You've seen Saved.
What's slain? What?
I don't know what's slain in the
spirit. Do you guys know who Benny Hinn is? No, okay. Benny Hinn is like an evangelist who.
Oh, Benny Hinn!
Yes.
I thought you said Benny Hanna's, which is like a Japanese restaurant. I was so confused. Oh my god!
Yeah, no, I know what you mean now.
So slain in the spirit. I mean, if you've seen Saved or any of Benny Hinn's crusades or whatever, he like puts his hands on them and they like shake and convulse and then fall on their chairs or backwards or whatever. Yeah. So maybe that's what it's. Maybe it's just like a really bad orgasm.
The speaking in tongues and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, kind of. We do that, don't we? You do speak in tongues a little bit.
I've made some inaudible, some incoherent.
Oh my Speaking as a lesbian, I've definitely spoken with my tongue, but that's another issue entirely.
We knew this was going to be the best conversation yet.
You just had to wait.
Oh man. But anyway. I think I know a couple of us that would have been a little scandalized though if we were part of this conversation.
No. I mean, I have to say, I like my women like I like my candy, bright, sweet, and on my tongue.
Lovely.
Love it.
Kate's getting mail composed to her right now.
One of my buttons just went undone, guys. Oh my god.
The power of the Holy Spirit. I feel so blasphemous.
This is going to be the craziest discussion. Anyway.
I know. I'm partially asking myself, do I rein it in or do I let it go?
I'll let it go.
Or do I let it go?
I'm not going to be president anytime soon. Plus, now the standard is much lower.
Oh, yes. Unfortunately.
All right.
Oh, God.
Anyway,
I mean,
so we
okay,
were
only
talking about-
slightly off topic. When I look at, say, Trump and his wife, and I'm like, do those two really get it on?
They have
Ew.
a kid.
Yeah.
They do.
I don't know.
So
They
creepy.
do. Courtney knows.
Well, they have a kid, is what I was agreeing
Melania is
to.
confided in her.
You know, I do have a friend that lives like 4 doors down from the Summers lady. What's her name?
Christine Hoffman. No, who's that?
Yeah.
Who?
The lady who wrote a book about Trump or the non-disclosure agreement and all of that. Summer? I don't remember.
Wait,
are you talking about the porn star?
Porn star?
The porn star.
Oh, Stormy
Oh.
Daniels.
Oh, Stormy Daniels.
I don't know. There was an S. There was an S in there. Okay, Stormy
Talking
Daniels.
about weather.
Right. Yeah, it was one of my friends lives like 4 doors down from her, and I was just like, oh, that's interesting.
Rachel's here.
I was in their backyard, and they were like, yeah, she's over there, pointing. I was like, oh, that's
Nice.
crazy.
That's cool.
Mm.
I guess.
Or whatever.
Oh gosh.
That's a 6th degree of separation I was looking forward to.
Right.
Courtney does
Yeah.
know. Who knows?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my god.
It is kind of cool when you like shake somebody's hand or like meet somebody and they've spoken to or like interacted with a really far off person, and you're just like, oh my gosh, it's like 1 degree of separation. It does feel like something that matters in your head. I don't know why.
I know, yeah. It's like, oh, you
Yeah.
know someone I know.
Like
Cool.
like a friend of mine, Holy Kool-Aid, he recently took a picture with Bill Nye, and I was like, oh my gosh, like
I saw that.
it feels like I've met Bill Nye. No, but you know, but I mean, I saw him speak, but it's just like, you know, it's funny how we like create these ideas in our head that like, oh, I'm connected to this person in this way, but really not at all. Anyway, hi Rachel.
Oh, we can't hear you, Rachel. Are you muted?
Can we hear her?
Oh no.
Oh, there we go.
No. Yep.
No, can't hear you, honey.
Can you hear me?
I thought I heard her say, oh, no.
That was me.
Can anyone hear
Oh,
me?
okay. Yeah, Christine, we can hear you.
Okay, good. Because I can't see myself. It's not coming up anymore. Rachel! I'm excited to hear about Rachel because she's so new, you know?
Yeah.
I love it. Baby lust. Baby lust. My baby lust.
Woo!
All right, can you hear me?
That's a really good song.
We
reference.
can.
We can.
These headphones are kind of shitty, so.
Yay!
Nice makeup and nice ears. You guys are so cute.
Thank you.
Happy Halloween.
Yeah.
How are you, Rachel? Are you ready to talk about lust?
Just always ready to talk about lust.
Cannot wait. So, from coming out, you're a relatively recent deconversion. What are do you feel like there was any detrimental, factors from feeling that sort of suppression that you might be dealing with now? If that's not too personal a question, or
that aspect has been like really hard on me. I mean, maybe it's too personal, but I won't share any personal details, so whatever.
generalizing is okay.
Yeah. I was raised very much in purity culture, and I internalized those ideas. And so I'm dealing with working through those now and figuring out what I think about those things from a secular perspective. Yeah, and it's really difficult because I push down like all of my feelings about everything. And so it's like, now things are okay. And it's like, I don't know.
So you're starting to kind of accept that, those feelings when they emerge are acceptable. They're okay. They're natural. They're like par for the course, and they're good, and they're beautiful, and they're great, and they lead to wonderful things.
Yeah.
Or just like, yeah, they do.
We've already, I don't know if you've seen some of our past, like when we first started on this chat, Rachel, we've already gone a little crazy. So
y'all know it's my fault or Kate's fault.
I take full credit, full responsibility for making
think it's
crazy.
Kate's fault, actually.
Absolutely.
So what do you?
Yeah.
Go ahead. Go
You
ahead.
go. No.
Okay.
Shannon goes.
Shannon goes. I go first.
Raise your hand.
All right. So I guess nobody got that was supposed to be a joke, but that's okay. All right. Now I lost track because I was thinking about going first. All right. So
I think you were probably going to ask Rachel a question,
my dear.
Oh, I think it was a general question, actually. Oh, yeah, it was a panel question. So my question to the panel is: did any of you have any experiences after you deconverted? And it wouldn't necessarily be for Kate, because Kate, unlike the rest of us, didn't deconvert. Where you went out and experienced something that you maybe wouldn't have experienced of a lustful nature, and came to the realization that, oh, okay, you know what, this isn't either what I thought it was, or wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, or, or were you overwrought with guilt that was sort of, vestigial guilt that was left over from the pangs of still being enthralled by religious mindset. Did anybody have any of those experiences or hear of any of those experiences? Could be, someone
I had some guilt. But that was, I deconverted around the same time that I decided not to be a virgin anymore. So,
same.
So, for me, it was that kind of situation where I was like, sorry, my ears came off. So it was that kind of situation where I was still sort of thinking about God and how mad he was at me and how upset I was with myself. So, there was a lot of guilt in that. And then after I deconverted, I think it kind of I don't think I carried it over too much.
Really?
Yeah, I didn't have any residual. I was like, oh, no, this is fine. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of my reservation about what I was doing was more societal, because it was centered around promiscuity versus like what was actually happening. I don't know if that makes sense, but so this idea of like of intimacy only happening within relationship contexts was something that I didn't really resonate with when I stopped having my first relationship that was intimate. And so because of that, I was kind of like anti-relationship for a little while, and I spent about 2 years sort of building friendships with people. And so that type of relationship with sexual behavior was very much against a religious context. But by that time I wasn't religious anymore. And so it is sort of unfortunate that when you leave religion, you don't have these sort of ideas around the morality of that, of whether that's okay, whether you're okay with that or not, and where you actually stand with that. You're sort of left at some kind of like Rumspringa, where you're like left to everything happen at once, and you're just like, oh my gosh, what's happening? But I think, I'm not sure that my religious background hindered my exploration of that, or my my ideas around whether that was okay. I think it was just about, am I okay with this? And what, unfortunately, like societally, what does this say about who I am as a female? That was more what that was about, unfortunately. And so, yeah, I think that the religious context can kind of transfer over to these societal double standards that are placed on women versus men, and it can be really tough to navigate that apart from these internal shames that are placed on top of that with religion.
It's only peripherally related in its own way, but lust and religion and homosexuality certainly crisscross, right? Because a lot of people have said, oh, you just want to live in sin, you just want to have sex, yada, yada, yada. And it's like they don't even consider the possibility that homosexuality could be about love and not sex.
Right.
But because they're so hung up on sex, that's all they can see. And I mean, keep in mind, I'm an 80s kid. I saw a lot of people, a lot of celebrities who were coming out for the first time in public on television. And like there was the whole people were cheering, people were booing, all that stuff. It was crazy. So, I mean, not entirely related, but it's certainly about lust to some people.
Oh yeah, no, that's completely related. Yeah,
especially like within the church too. I find that sex is very much tied into your gender role. Like sex is reproductive essentially from a female standpoint, because you're expected to be the head of a family and to, you know, make the babies, and the sex is tied into what that role is supposed to mean for you. So the conception or the conceptualization of having lustful feelings or relationships that don't ultimately lead down a path to instantiating that role are seen as just completely reprobate and, you know, unacceptable. So when you're taught that not only do you have to repress those feelings, but the reason that you have to repress those feelings, those natural feelings, is because the only reason you get to have them or can have them is in this specific context that's being dictated to you.
right.
I mean,
and then you hear about those religious families where, like, the poor mother has 18 kids. Like, she spends 3 months out of a 20-year marriage not pregnant. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Right.
When I was a Christian, I really wanted to have a lot of kids. And now I'm like rethinking everything. And I love kids, okay? But now I'm like, well, I don't have to. And so I'm not going to for the next little bit at least, and figure that out. I have more. I mean, I thought I had options before, but now I'm like, I don't know what I want.
now you have infinite options.
All the options.
You were asking about like residual guilt and things like that. I think for me, like the rational side of me and the intuitive emotional side of me are two different things. And the rational side has completely moved on from like religious things. And I've been trying to learn a lot about sexuality and relationships and things like that from a secular perspective. So I'm like really far ahead. But then the like religious training that I've had makes the more intuitive side way far behind. And it surprises me where I'll like go to do something and I'll I don't know, I get really scared, or I just have reactions that I'm like, whoa, like where did that come from? And I feel like a lot of people raised in a similar environment would feel the same way.
It's conditioning. It's emotional conditioning.
Oh yeah. Like I was raised in an environment where it just seemed like women were supposed to be asexual, and I was very much not. And so it just like made me feel like a freak. Like they would talk in church about how men needed to not lust and not watch porn and things like that. And like those are things that I was dealing with. And so I was like, who am I as a woman? Like, am I like a man? Like it just it messes you up.
That's interesting.
Similar to what
go ahead.
What Courtney was saying.
Yeah. I didn't have that issue as much in my church. As our female mentors were a lot more open about their sexuality and their either lack of interest in sex or their interest in sex. And as we grew older, I saw them sort of progress to into a more liberal view of it. And that doesn't mean that they have entirely, changed their views on it. But there were a few women that really embraced, like, I really love sex and I love sex, but it was always, with my husband. And it was always, there was a few women who would say that they weren't comfortable with sex, but they did it for their husband. So there was also a flip side of this where,
Really weird.
a flip side of this where it's like, you know, we're talking about lust and having it because we're all horny women. But you know, there are these. Yes, like, I'm sorry. I'll speak for myself. Really horny women.
No, that's fair.
That who, you know, are open about our sexuality, but there are a lot of women out there who are not really representing, who aren't as comfortable with this, and who don't necessarily want, sort of the asexual group or the less sexual group, who feel like they have to basically perform for their husbands. And I saw that a lot in the church, because it was like the mentors wanted to stay, you know, open. They wanted to tell us like what the deal is, but didn't necessarily have the tools themselves to kind of navigate that world, you know?
Right.
And so, yeah. So
I think also, like, I definitely agree with you that there's a group of, like, you know, that there's people that are asexual and they don't, I agree with what you're saying. But I think that, like, repression and religious training and shame and all those things could contribute to somebody not being open to exploring. And so possibly, if they're not as inclined to explore on their own, they're not as motivated naturally, then they might just never explore. And like, I feel like, I don't know, I don't want to speak for anybody else's sexuality or how they're feeling, but I feel like that could be a factor.
There are wrong ways to do it. That's sure. Like if you get into sort of a monotonous routine where you're not getting anything from it, and you don't feel as though you have the ability to be open about ideas about how that could change, and you wouldn't be able to, you know, explore, you know, literature and videos that might help assist you figure out how to try to get that to change, then it could become a monotonous chore.
And I also
pretty quickly.
Yeah. And I also think
really
that there's these like beliefs about sexuality, and I feel like you have to kind of conform to that. Like, men are more sexual than women, men are more visual than women. And women are more emotional, and they're like, I just think
like holistic about sex.
Yeah. And those ideas aren't true for all people. I don't know, like, it's more or less, I don't know.
Although I can tell you that the concept of lesbian bed death is a real thing.
What does that mean?
Basically, that means that
I'm taking notes. 1 sec.
A lot in like long-term committed relationships, a lot of lesbians just sort of stop having sex. It just sort of stops. Like it's very infrequent. And of my relationships I've been in, that happened a fair bit.
That happens in relationships, though, too. Just relationships. Well, I was married for 12 years. That happens.
Okay, but it's still very much a stereotype, if nothing else. The lesbian bed. Look it up.
Okay. So I'm wondering, Kate, is that because lesbian sex is like really energy consuming?
I mean, there is some of that.
It's like exhaustive.
It's a bit awkward. I mean, unless you're using some really interesting toys, you kind of have to take turns. So that can get a little labor intensive at times. It can be like, well, I'm done. What do you want? The kind of thing. But like it's seriously, if someone's selfish in bed, that really stinks. But no, I think part of it though is what you were talking about before, is how men are much more sexual than women and all of that. And as much as that sounds like a horrible stereotype, it seems to happen with a lot of the same-sex relationships I've seen between other women.
Yeah, I think there is kind of a stereotype around persuasion of sexual activity with women toward men, like sort of seduction, and that can be troublesome in relationships, because if there's a sense that men are going to be more sexual than women, and any sort of like seduction thing is going to be accepted, then Thanks.
My daughter.
It was just funny. It was funny. But if that, I've just seen like in relationships that the assumption that female seduction of men can be when that's not working, or when it's rejected, it can be even more of a rejection because of those stereotypes around men being more sexual than women, and women women being expected to be the seducer, and to have that be a success, and it can be sort of more of a defeat of like the female ego,
that makes sense,
which is really interesting.
Sorry, to interrupt. It makes sense, kind of, because if you have that assumption that they're always going to want it, essentially, no matter what, and then you attempt to seduce it and they're not feeling it, you're like, wait a minute, like what? You would internalize that because you'd be like, what the hell is wrong with me? You're supposed to just want it all the time,
right?
Oh yeah, I've left the room. I've left the room in tears because of that, and that's not religiously connected. It's just like this like feeling of like, what is wrong with me? And that comes from, I think too, like it can come from a difference in libidos. Something this is a lot of like the things we're talking about are things that I didn't get to explore or think about until much later. I mean, that guilt that Shannon was asking about didn't really exist for me, but this like what you were saying before, Courtney, when you were talking about like it all happening at once, like for me, I kind of did. But it was more like navigating the social behaviors behind the learning how to like take rejection, and that it didn't mean that I was like, you know, ugly or not
less
appealing
of a woman.
or whatever. Less of a woman, right? Yeah.
Because I think it can tie very much into women's sense of like, can you have children or can you not? And does that say something about whether you're really a woman? That's such an awful idea, an awful pressure to put on women. But I think that seducibility is something that is also a societal pressure for women. And it, you know, and it's also the same pressure in that same situation is put on men to accept that and to be the male figure of that scenario. And so that can put a lot of strain on them as well, and to put a lot of pressure on relationships and sexual friendships and things like that. The
suppression of lust feelings wouldn't be you know, just women that are affected by that.
Absolutely.
Like men,
oh no.
And like, and I think what I'm gleaning from this conversation is like one of the biggest issues that I'm hearing, and this would go for both men and women, is trying to figure out how to be in a healthy, mutually enjoyable, you know, and have conversations about and find ways to explore and have mutually enjoyable, healthy sexual relationships, either short-term or long-term, because even having conversations about it is seen as, you know, sinful, lustful, you know, reprehensible behavior. So you just kind of never get to wrap your head around or explore how to enact something that's just a natural part of existence and like a really important part of, you know, being.
Yeah, and those
concepts.
well, those concepts of like of consent and of communication and what people are ready for and what they're not. Christine has talked about this a lot with the sense that everything is off limits until marriage happens in the religious context, and then everything is fine. And you go from like 0 to 60, and it can be just traumatic, I would think, if you're looking at things in that way, and if you live that reality that religion wants you to of everything is off limits and then everything is okay, it can be really difficult to know what you're okay with as a human being and to understand how to communicate what's happening, and all of those things that you sort of learn as you go. If you're not able to make those skills, and if you're not given those tools in like religious school or in sex education, then it can be really difficult to navigate.
But what if you're like, you find out you're not even sexually compatible? Like you don't know until you get married, and then you get into bed and it's like, what is this crap? I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I would not buy the car without test driving it first.
Yeah.
Right. As a Christian, people said that and they like taught against that. They were like, oh man, the purity culture stuff is just
so I don't know. I've also heard people say that, and I mean, sure, they were Christians, but whatever. But I've heard people say that, like, I'm not discounting their opinion though, but that it did strengthen their bond, you know, between each other. They felt like, you know, waiting together and then being together. I mean, you can't discount that stuff. There are people with beautiful relationships.
Sure.
I think though, like they value that because they believe that that's something that's valuable, like waiting. And so for them, that's something special. I don't think that's bad. If a couple wants to do that and they do that and that's special for them, like great. But I don't think that's the way that it has to be. I don't know.
Or should be, because what if conversely, what if you wait and wait and wait and you're looking forward to it, you get married because you want to have sex, and that's a component of why you're getting married. And then what if it's disappointing?
Right.
And then you don't know how to articulate with that person how to make it better. Then what? Like what happens if you have all that built up and then that massive letdown and then that's it forever?
Yeah. And those like religious sex education programs don't navigate that. They don't teach communication and consent and the idea that consent is something that has to be discussed in marriage or in relationships or outside of that. That's something that belongs as part of the conversation in any context. And so it's something that's really important for people to be able to have a language to communicate when they are comfortable, when they're not, and how to navigate that respectfully and not create this like awful, you know.
Yeah, I'm thinking like based kind of going off of what you're saying, at least in fundamentalism, like the idea of who humans are and like human nature and things like that is different than from a secular perspective. Yes. So people aren't able to control themselves and their own sexuality. And the sexuality is so bad and humans are just incapable of dealing with that. So it seems to me like they put up external controls over that. Because like if you sin, that's like the worst thing ever. So to avoid sinning, you know, can only have sex within marriage. And it's like all of purity culture shit. It's like, blah. And and yeah, it's so sorry, I'm rambling everywhere. But
no, don't be sorry. That's all really interesting information.
You can ramble.
Yeah. Because you're talking about like, oh, it's important to establish consent and discuss these things. But I think from the fundamentalist perspective, it's like that's not even on the table because people can't be in charge of their own bodies and in charge of that aspect of themselves. Right. And there's no boundaries that people can establish themselves. All boundaries are external. And so then just like you're saying, like what if you get into a relationship and you aren't taught these skills, then you have no ability to have boundaries and boundary violations everywhere and nothing to do about it. Blah.
Or a weakened ability. It's definitely a weakened ability. It just takes longer to navigate. The expectations are so high and the skill set is so low. And I'm not like, because I've seen plenty of Christian couples navigate relationships. So it's not, it just takes so much more time and patience and
you also don't know what's going on in their mind and behind closed doors.
I'm coming from the perspective of like extreme fundamentalism, no sex ed, like more my upbringing.
Well, and I also wonder this idea, this idea in the religious context that the person that you marry is perfectly suited for you. And that this idea that like you're like you don't have to worry about being sexually compatible because you will be because they're chosen for you, you know, and like that whole concept. I wonder if like that helps with like a placebo effect of like just seeing that they're a different version of a person than who they really are, or if somehow that gets like translated between reality and with religious belief. Like you kind of have to reconcile that this person, you have to work with them to fit with your life. And I don't know, like, I don't know if that's something that challenges the religious belief, or if it just gets like integrated into whatever their belief is of like soulmates and people being like perfectly suited to who you need.
An interesting question. And it reminds me
I
of
think
the
it depends
question
on
about the nature of God. Sorry. It reminds me of the question of the nature of God, because I feel like the same thing happens. You have this expectation set up and then it's not met. And so, yeah, that's a good question. Is the belief revised? Do you throw away the belief? Like, yeah, I feel like there has to be some revision.
Or do they internalize and think to themselves, what am I doing wrong?
Right.
Which is another option.
Yeah.
That do they get guilt?
Yeah.
Do they think to themselves, okay, like I'm not finding this satisfying. Maybe I'm doing it wrong, or I'm not satisfying my partner, or I don't really want this, or I'm not really feeling this, or I'm not getting what I thought that I was going to get, or I want more than my partner, and I don't know how to articulate that because I still don't want him to think that I'm lustful or like all of those things would be taken into consideration too. And if you can't have a healthy two-way conversation without fear or guilt or feeling as though, you know, this is something that's really taboo, that even I wasn't really religious when I got married. So I guess this would be a good question. I didn't go through the counseling. So do you still, even within a marriage, within the context of marriage, is it still considered sinful to feel lustful towards that partner?
I asked my
lust.
parents that.
Oh, you did? What did they say?
Answer.
What did they
They didn't answer.
Because like I was trying to figure this all out, and then I don't know. I made some comment about it. They just looked uncomfortable.
Really?
Yeah, I feel like it's at least in my upbringing. Like it's just you don't talk about things like that.
Right.
And
my family either.
It's definitely like really bad to think lustfully about somebody else.
Yeah.
But that's a good question, Shannon.
Yeah, because I don't think that you would go through your whole life being taught, don't be lustful, don't be lustful, don't be lustful, repress it, repress it, repress it, don't talk about it, don't talk about it, don't talk about it, don't talk about it, and then get married and like it's not like somebody's going to approach you and go, okay, you can let all that go, let all of that conditioning and programming go. Now it's okay.
Well,
that's weird. I don't know if that's lust. I'm not sure it could be. Oh, go ahead, Courtney.
I think that they would define it differently. Yeah, I think I agree with what you're saying, Christina. That like, I think within the context of marriage, it would be used in a different context.
But that
like
heuristics already built in your head. You wouldn't identify it as an emotion.
Oh, but it's not. But it's a release, and it's a good release.
Okay.
But I also think that like that indoctrination of this version of lust and this version of lust isn't okay. I think you would open up like a window and not open up the whole room of now all of this stuff is still not okay, but just this is okay. And then everything else is still suppressed. I think, you know, in terms of like sodomy and homosexuality and things like that, those things would still be not okay in a religious context of like that indoctrination. But I think, you know, opening up a certain context for this being okay, and still having a lot of restrictions around that, depending on the denomination, I think that would still persist.
Why is homosexuality not okay in religion anyway? You'd think, I mean, I imagine some people way back in the Stone Age went, ew, and wrote it into their religion. And yeah.
That sounds like a good hypothesis.
I don't know.
Procreation is a hypothesis that I've heard before.
Yeah, I think it's a very old taboo. Like human history, old taboo.
They just don't like it because they've never tried it.
Amen.
Kate'll show up.
Preach it.
I don't know. I've been taking notes. I'm not saying.
Right. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. Like if it was some sort of threat to the builders of the major religions. But but I think it's just like culturally a historical outgroup. And I don't know, it might be something to do with like reproduction. Maybe like a fear of people of the population suffering if like too many people are born with like homosexual urges or something, but it's such a small subset of the population.
What about property ownership, inheritance, things like that from that perspective? Like if you had two men sharing a household, for example, one passed away who owns the property, two women couldn't own property. So entering into a lesbian relationship would essentially be just like saying, okay, well, we're just going to go live in the woods.
Yeah, right.
It's also witchcraft. Yeah, it's also witchcraft, I'm pretty sure.
Well, and
Kate, you're a witch, right? I'm a witch.
Like that norm is like stemmed from the older assumption of hetero only, right? So I don't know where it stems from, because it is annoying. Bo Burnham has a song where he's like, I sent gays to deal with overpopulation. Look how that turned out, you know.
Oh, I love that song. The one from God's perspective. I love that song.
I love Bo. Bo is amazing. I just watched that. This is off topic, but I just watched that movie that he wrote and directed, his directorial debut, 8th Grade. It's painful because it is completely real. It is so real of what like that age level deals with and what their life looks like and how honest and like visceral their experience can be. It's just amazing. So I definitely recommend it. But it is tough to watch. I was like watching it and like I couldn't have watched it in a theater because I would have been out of my seat, just like, oh, I'm so uncomfortable.
Oh no, I want to watch that movie.
What's it called?
It's called 8th Grade. Written and directed by Bo Burnham.
I feel like it would bring back flashbacks.
So I don't.
Yeah, you're close enough to 8th grade. I'm far enough away. I think I'd be all right.
Not that close.
My kid's closer to 8th grade.
What's interesting is there's an interview that Bo did that was the movie is sort of about the things that we forget about being in 8th grade. You know, there's a difference between experiencing it and our memory of it, and sort of like what we forget, and also what kids are currently dealing with like social media and stuff that me and people older than me may not have had to deal with. So it's just really accurate. I watched it with my boyfriend, who's like a school teacher of that age. So like he was like my my barometer of like, oh, this is accurate. Like, anyway, this is so off topic, but it's just like, oh
gosh, how long are we planning on going this evening? We've hit the hour mark. This is fun.
That's true. Yeah. We could end, but I could talk about sex and lust forever.
Oh my gosh, me too.
Good topic.
And repression. Ugh.
yeah.
Gosh.
And repression. Yeah, it does suck that we've like spent at least half an hour on repression. So sad.
I know. Well, that's probably, yeah.
To bring up was the idea of sex addiction, and that's something that isn't recognized by the psychological community. It's not in the DSM as a legitimate disorder. If you have an unhealthy relationship with sex, then it's usually stemmed from a disorder of something else. So it can be like an addictive personality or something like that, but it wouldn't be a unhealthy relationship with sex itself, because sex is something that is natural, and lust and all these things are something that are, you know, that have a very wide range of practice and of preference. And so it's difficult to judge what is healthy and what isn't. But religious organizations label sometimes just use of pornography as a sex addiction.
Mostly. Actually, it's mostly use of pornography. Like, right. Usually that's where it starts. And then they're like, oh no, because if you continue down this path, then you're going to become like a sex fiend and want it all the time.
Yeah, and their definition of like sex addiction is something that is within the context of something that's quite normal, or something that isn't necessarily detrimental. So because it's not something that's treated directly, it's not recognized as a disorder, but people still go into these treatment programs for quote unquote sex addiction, and they have these labels of diagnosis put on them, and that is damaging within itself. So it can be just really, really awful, because we've talked about like this extreme of lust in a bad context of like, you know, violating someone's bodily autonomy, but there's the other side of that of repression to the point of believing that any sort of normal sexual activity and relationships around sexuality can be an addictive level and something that's unhealthy enough to be treated with stuff like sterility or sort of like aversion therapy. And it's awful.
Aversion therapy, like like every time you turn porn on, someone like slaps you in the face, like just like a hand. Wow. Yeah. Is there what is the aversion? I've never heard of aversion therapy.
I don't know. Well, I know that like, you know, things like smoking cigarettes, people will do aversion therapy of like giving you like nausea pills and you'll throw up when you smoke cigarettes,
or an elastic band on your wrist.
Yes, that was the one I was going to mention, because that's the milder form I've heard of.
Right.
Yeah, I haven't heard of sex though.
But I'm not sure like what the
self-guided generally.
I know that there's, of course, we've all heard of like the treatment programs to cure homosexuality within religious programs.
That's true.
And that is terrifying and awful. But there's
have you ever seen the movie But I'm a Cheerleader?
Yes.
Okay, because that's a beautiful parody of like gay conversion therapy and all that.
Yeah. There's a new movie coming out. It's like called like Boy Disappeared or something like that. But it's sort of like that story of a gay young man who goes into that therapy.
You know, I had a point about the sex addiction. I think from the religious context and from the religious perspective, it makes sense to have, like, if people are very sexual, that they have some sort of problem, but they're like making the problem themselves. So like if you live in a world where humans are not supposed to be sexual, like I don't know if you guys have read Daryl Ray, like Sex and God.
No.
I don't know if it's in there or I don't know. Anyway, so like if you think about the like Christian, like Jesus and Mary and God, like all of these figures are asexual. Like there's no talk about like their sexual habits or anything. Like they just nothing. And so then that kind of idea that like people, and like Paul says not to get married, and like there's a perspective that sex is something that's bad, right? And it should be pushed down. And so then when there's any sort of like when it's there's no way to express it and to like there's no way to express it. So it kind of makes sense that they're like, oh, something's wrong with me. But if they didn't have those underlying beliefs, then they might not have these issues with not being able to express it in a healthy way. You know?
From a psychological perspective, it's just a sensation-seeking activity, essentially. Like the same reason that some people they want to go skydiving.
Right.
Yeah.
Seriously, like it can be just, if you take it to an extreme where the thoughts of it consume you and you're constantly pursuing it, and you can pursue it to an unhealthy degree. I wouldn't argue that you can't. Like there is a point that you would reach where, you know, it's unhealthy. Anything is unhealthy in excess if it's all consuming, but it's just another form of sensation seeking activity. And if you get to that degree, then I don't think that you would consider yourself a sex addict. any more than you would consider yourself a skydiving addict or an extreme sports addict, but you would probably have to have a look at, you know, why you're sensation seeking and why you chose that. But that's an individual case by case.
Well, that was something I was curious about. It's like, if someone is literally sex addicted, are they addicted to the chemical feeling of an orgasm? Are they addicted to just the act itself, or what?
That's what I was thinking. If you like separate these things, good point.
I think they're all different kinds.
Right.
It could be the act of trying to find a partner and getting them to say yes, like being able to seduce somebody could be
seduction is
more
very
so
tempting.
Yeah, like having that power of being able to, and that's an affirming activity too. So it has multiple qualities of positive psychological affect. Like if you pursue multiple people consistently, they say yes to your pursuit of them and they are interested in you. And then you engage in an activity where endorphins are released again. And then you are able to emotionally detach and, you know, discard that relationship and walk away from it and pursue and go through that cycle again. You know, that constant cycle can, you know, create a heuristic that's potentially unhealthy, but you can do that with multiple other types of behaviors too that are, you know, just as natural and interesting.
I think like just that behavior itself can't really tell you if there's something wrong with a person psychologically.
I don't think that there would necessarily be something wrong with a person psychologically if they're doing that. That could even just be a phase that somebody goes through because they're coping with a thing.
Right.
With deconversion. Wait.
Yeah, like deconversion. Right.
I'm still coping,
not
guys.
A life choice. People don't generally live an entire lifetime like that, you know. People go through ebbs and flows in there.
The argument that the psychiatric community makes about why it's not in the DSM is that the relationship to sex is something that's very diverse and individual, and so addiction to sexuality and sex is something that, if it's to an unhealthy degree, then it should be stemmed from something else.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, so it's not just like this idea of I like lust more than everybody else to an unhealthy degree. It's usually like a like you were saying, like a sensation seeking to distract from some sort of deeper problem or whatever.
It's a manifest symptom.
Yeah. Right. But what I find interesting is that that if you are seeking therapy for an unhealthy relationship around sexuality, then I don't think that would be in the context of sex addiction therapy, because in what I've read, sex addiction therapy in like the religious context is something that the idea that your relationship with sex is unhealthy comes from the outside. It doesn't come from you. Like it's not detrimental to your functionality. It's not causing you distress. It's this guilt-ridden idea of everybody else's understanding of what your relationship with sex should be, and that you're not matching that expectation. Right. So because of that, I think for me, sex addiction therapy is damaging of the label and the therapy, because if you're imposing your idea of what their behavior should be onto them and calling them unhealthy for not matching that, I think that's just not what should be done.
That was well articulated. I agree with that.
Yeah, definitely. So, go ahead, Shannon.
I just wanted to ask one more question if we have enough time, and it pertains to, I've been doing research on Christian counseling services just for a separate project that I'm doing. And through my research, I came and this isn't something that happens all the time. However, there is a sect of Christian counselors and that believe that demons and or spirits. It's a real thing. This is legitimate.
No, that's my upbringing.
No, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. But so there's a Jezebel spirit that essentially that can have effect, that can actually affect your thought patterns. Mm-hmm. This is a real thing that they bring up in counseling sessions. And I just thought, I wanted to know if anybody else had ever heard of it. And Rachel, you were exposed to it. Oh my God.
Well, I wasn't exposed to it. And I don't know. I think within Pentecostalism, or within my upbringing, that version of Pentecostalism, it wasn't so, this whole demons thing wasn't so explicit, but that's definitely there. Like my parents believe that like sexual thoughts, like lustful thoughts, are basically like like demonic forces. And it's like in different from different perspectives, it's more explicit, and they'll be like, oh yeah, you have a spirit of lust or something like that. But
yeah,
they perform exorcisms.
That's familiar.
Screw tape letters, man.
Yeah. Anybody else know what that is?
Well, wouldn't they be sexorcisms?
The screw tape letters?
Okay.
In that instance, perhaps, yeah.
What were you saying, Kate?
I said, wouldn't they be sexorcisms?
Sexorcisms. Oh,
sorry. I was telling you guys earlier about my sense of humor. You didn't believe me.
We believe you. We believe you.
I didn't know it was so pun-hilarious.
Wow.
Yeah, I haven't. I did sort of have that experience with the Jezebel spirit, but it wasn't something to be exorcised.
Whoa. So you were told that you were affected by a Jezebel spirit?
Kind of. It's a phrase that came up. It wasn't the same as like being possessed, right? It was like, oh, you have it was more of like a
right?
metaphor,
like
than anything.
In my background, there's oppression and there's possession. So Christians can't be possessed by a demon, but they can be oppressed. So the demonic forces that are around can influence you and like put thoughts in your head and things like that, but they can't like come into your body and take over.
Wow.
Right. Sounds really weird. But that's the beliefs.
Oh my gracious.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
So I did want to ask everybody what, our traditional have you sinned this month?
Oh gosh.
Kiss and tell, ladies.
I will be sinning a lot on Friday.
What?
My boyfriend's all the way across the country, but I'm going to visit him on Friday. So I will be sinning on Friday. But I may have done some residual sinning.
That's the name of a band, I think. Sinning on Friday.
Like that
band name? Our band name?
Sinning on Monday.
That does sound like a good band name.
What about you, Kate? Have you been doing any? Lovely. Aww.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know. Courtney, I just want to see her blush through her makeup. Come on, Courtney.
It is possible. We know, like from our other like sex ed conversation, we knew that I was like really shy. In a relationship and selling some toys and
You can't talk.
having some fun.
Nice. My daughter says she wants to talk. I hope that it's not about this. Not right now, honey. Not right now. So I actually have sort of been, I've had a lack of sex recently, which is really sad, but sometimes we get to share these things. But the other day I was like, you know what? I haven't masturbated in a while. So I was like, let's do it. That's my sinful story.
So until you actually get good at it, you're young, you're first figuring out like how to masturbate. Aren't you really just apprentice baiting?
Apprentice baiting. Novice baiting.
Oh, that's so good. That's what I really love about.
So dead,
companies around like bands and stuff that like sell toys and things. There's like AdamandEve.com and all these things. I really love that they're so sex positive and that they're very empowering to individuals to sort of explore themselves and then, you know, translate that into relationships and know what they need and want and all those things. So it can be really, really positive. I really love those companies for the role that they play in making sexual diversity very okay, you know, and exploration and all these things that are just part of human nature and natural and beautiful. And so it's really good to have those sort of companies advocating for that freedom of humanity.
Agreed. Rachel, have you sent?
Yeah, Rachel.
Rachel has not. I know.
2 weeks ago, I bought some sex toys. So.
All right.
You're done, Rachel. Yes. Well, I can't believe I'm celebrating somebody else buying sex toys right now. That's where I am in my life. Like,
welcome to the world of battery operated. Yeah.
It's hard to know what to say because, like, for so long, like, you can't talk about these things. And I was gonna say this before, but it, whatever, flew out of my mind. It's weird when you've been raised with some, like, everything's down because you can't just, like, let everything free, because when you're doing things with other humans, you have to negotiate, and I want to be an ethical person. So I have to, like, it's not like you just have to, like, switch. It's like you have to relearn everything and how things work. So
enjoy your lessons, Rachel. This will be the best and most enjoyable school you've ever attended.
Yes,
books, there's videos. There's so many learning materials, Rachel. You'll be fine.
On YouTube, there's so many, like, wonderful channels around sex positive practices and understanding. And then I think the biggest lesson that they teach is just to be okay with what you like and what you don't, and to explore that for yourself. And so that's, you know, everything is individual. Everything is on the table if you want it to be. And so it's really good, really quality content that I think is healthy for people to be free to be themselves.
Indeed. So my phone is going to die. It's at like 2%. So I have to go. But we'll be back next month, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea what we're going to talk about. I have no idea. What do we have left? How many sins do we have?
There's 3.
Sloth. Let's do sloth, and let's be a week late.
That's funny. That was good. That was good. I like it. Perfect. I'm down.
All right.
Sloth it is.
Cool. All right. Thank you, everybody, for hanging with us and sharing the birds and the bees and the toys and the trees.
Having a major overshare.
We have to overshare. That's what the internet's about, right?
Oh, man. I didn't overshare that much, but I came on late.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, you missed the first part.
Rachel came late. It's okay. At least you came at all.
That was a good
Aha. Don't laugh at me. Don't give me the.
We're laughing
don't
with you.
encourage it. That's fair. All right. Okay. Bye, everybody. Thank you for coming.
Have a good night, everyone.
Bye.
Have fun.
You have to turn it off live.
She has to run to the other computer. She's on her phone, so now she has to run to the computer.
Does she know that she has to turn it off?
I don't know. Maybe we're going to be live.